Now to introduce our next panel on optimizing production in the field, it's my pleasure to introduce its moderator, who will introduce his panel, Hank Volpe of MDR Consulting.
I see the guy in the corner.
Already we're having trouble with expectations. Anyway, thank you for all coming. We have a pretty in-depth topic, and we're going to have a conversation with everybody here. They're exceptional folks. I want to start to introduce on my immediate left here, Ray Thompson, who's the Director of Marketing Solutions for Broadcast and Media for Avid. And next to him is Jack Kane, who's the Technical Manager for NBC Connecticut and Telemundo Connecticut. And next to him is David Cyrak, who's the Director of News Technology at WFTV Channel 9 in Orlando. And next we have Larry Lafferty, who's the Director of Domestic and International ENG Operations for ABC News. And Pete McGowan, who's the Director of News Operations and New Technology for WCBS TV here in New York and WLNY TV in New York. So thank you all again for coming. Good morning, guys. We're going to try to have a conversation. So I want to start with a topic that has always been something that I've always been concerned with, and I think a lot of people here are emergency operations. And every one of you has been through some situation, whether it be recently or situations like Hurricane Sandy. But I'd like to start in particular with Larry and Dave about what they've had to deal with this year between hurricanes and the California fires.
Well, for Florida, of course, we really had one of the biggest pop-up storms of the century that came in through Mexico Beach. And I would say the biggest thing that I took away from this one, I've been in Florida for 20 years, is this one I think actually was the most dangerous to our crews. And the takeaway was that with all the technology that we have out there, we need to make steps to keep our crews safe. And I think that sometimes now with the added mobility of technology, you can put yourself closer to the front lines than maybe you should have. In the old days when you had a satellite truck, you were limited to where you could park it. You could limit to certain those things. Now I think there needs to be a reminder. Luckily in our case, our crew was not injured, but when it was coming ashore and we couldn't move them, it was really scary. And so I think that sometimes with that added ability to move, you also have to add almost twice the level of caution. That would be my takeaway from that event.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We were in Mexico Beach as well, and the decision to go there was made, ahead of the storm. So if you don't really have a lot of good forecasting of what's going to happen in that area, you could, by all means, put yourself in a bad situation. And it almost came to that, actually. So we had Ginger Z down there with a producer, a satellite truck, an engineer, and a couple of support people. And as the storm started to move in, we were live, wall-to-wall coverage, and you really can't move at that point. But there was a point in time where we actually did shut that location down and got out of there, just because of the fact that it was getting too dangerous. I agree with Dave. We have to watch out for the crews. It's paramount at ABC to provide training, gear, do a lot of post-mortem, after the fact planning on how we deal with the next storm or the next breaking news story that is associated with weather. We obviously know that weather is a big ratings grab. We see it all the time on our morning shows and on the evening network news. Mostly because of just the awesome video that we're moving that comes along with that type of story. A lot of it user-generated, a lot of it brought in from our affiliates. And I will tell you that our relationship with Dave and the station down in Orlando has been great. A bunch of big stories. So my hat's off to Dave and the things they do down there. I keep a good eye on what they're doing because they're kind of Central Florida, and you're looking at a lot of things happening on both coasts, and they're reacting very quickly to it. But getting back to the other things, in the West Coast, in our LA bureau, we do a lot of fire coverage, and what we do to really make sure we're protected from the parent company, Disney, they hand down very strict guidelines on how we cover news and how we react to breaking news like fires. Everybody in the LA bureau is given extensive training so they can cover the fires. We try not to get too close to the fires, obviously from the talent all the way down to the technical staff. We do have a lot of concerns about their safety. So they get equipment, they get good training. on the hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that, again, we try not to get ourselves too far into it. In the hurricanes, sometimes that's just part of the job, is to be close to those hurricanes. And as Josh Hayden here will attest to, who's here today, my partner, we are in the middle of it sometimes. And we learn. Each time we go out, we learn. I think the really important thing is when we come back home, we can do a postmortem. We sit down, we talk about what we did great, what we did okay, how we failed, mostly how we did great. And you know, it's all about protecting the crews. I think it's a good point and well taken, that it's the crews that have to feel safe in the field. You know, these guys, we push them really hard to go out and cover some really, really difficult situations. So that's where it starts for me in the engineering side, is to make sure these guys feel safe, that they're going to want to go out on the next one we go out on, and of course to you know, toe the company line and make sure that we're all following the rules and regulations that come along with those kind of stories.
One thing I'll add real quick, I don't have a picture of it to show, but on Instagram we have we developed a remote camera setup, and we call it Dorothy. You're familiar with the movie Twister, right? So we took a device, it's basically a remote camera that we can set up in the storm strike zone and abandon it and let it hang out in the storm and basically pull our people back. So it uses 2 Nest doorbells, cameras, and it's Wi-Fi based, and it has its own cellular bonding, and it's on marine batteries. But there's an Instagram page, it's Dorothy9 WFTV, if you want to see a picture of it. But that was kind of as a reaction to the last round of storms, and where I think that with technology we don't always have to leave people hanging out there in the wind, and we can still get the pictures. And that device we made has live weather data on it too, so it has rainfall, wind, and wind direction in that same device.
Now, one of the things I know pretty well everyone on the panel has dealt with was situations in the last couple of years up the East Coast, like Hurricane Sandy. And I know that every one of the areas was hit and required some exceptional coverage, and there was issues with loss of equipment, people in danger. If you guys can elaborate a little bit on how you approach that, because it is you know, to me, the only analogy I can come up with in a world outside of broadcasting is walking up to a 5-alarm fire. What do you do?
You know, you could do a whole course, you know, at Columbia J on Hurricane Sandy, and we learned a ton of lessons from that. Obviously, used every weapon in the arsenal. One thing that struck me in terms of the technology, it's brought you closer to the story, but it's also made it safer, kind of in the same way, because if you could take one of the bonded cellular, as long as the cells are working, which is a big if, you know, in a lot of these circumstances, but if you can take that and have someone in a really heavy SUV, a Chevy Suburban Expedition or something like that, you've just increased the safety factor from a satellite truck, because if you're in those heavy winds, those dishes are rated for 40 miles an hour, and those people are just standing out there, and you know, sometimes we'll assign people just to make sure they don't get hit, that they're watching for any kind of debris or anything flying around. But in terms of planning for a Sandy, you couldn't really plan for a Sandy, particularly for us. I mean, you know, Florida gets hurricanes all the time. There were so many different aspects of it, but when I think about Sandy, and if I was told another one was going to come again, I'd be very grateful that I still had satellite trucks. I'd be very grateful that I still had satellite phones, even if I hadn't fired them up in 5 years or 10 years. We just ordered a new satellite truck, and I made sure they put a sat phone in there, and people thought I was crazy for doing so. But you know, Sandy had an arc. It was before the storm, where everything worked. During the storm, where only the bonded cells work, right? And back then it was 3G, so it was amazing that they worked. And then after the storm, where the cell towers lost their fuel supplies, their power supplies, and the only thing that worked was satellite. And the other thing we realized too is just how much you rely on infrastructure, because in the tri-state area we ran out of gas. So I can talk about this now because it's years later, but we made a kind of a shady deal and had a truck come in from Pennsylvania to 58th Street at midnight with an armed guard just to fuel up. That's just between us and whoever's over there. But you know, what I like to say is and then I'll let this go, but you know, I'm an expert on failure, when you think failure, think. But if it could fail, I've been there, and you obviously learn from failure. And if there's one thing that I constantly hold the line on, and I have the backing of my guys when I do this, is there's no such thing as a new technology replacing an old technology. Everything in the pool. I've always said if I was a cop, I wouldn't have one ankle holster, I'd have two, because particularly at WCBS, we're not going to fail. All right, do we fail? Of course we do, but our mission is to not fail. Our viewers are expecting us to be there, and we're going to use everything possible. Bonded cell, microwave, KU. I was a little surprised at the poll earlier that said only about 40% of prosumer. We're 100%. We'll do it with iPhone. We don't care what it is. We just have to get it on the air and get it to our viewers. And on the air also now means OTT, which we can talk about later.
Oh, that kind of gets into an area that I'm interested in is when you're looking at the new technologies, and I think this is just for anyone here who wants to jump in. I mean, you've seen trends with some places buying monster trucks and storm trackers, bonded cellular. Our budgets are constrained, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but you have all of these things you need to do, and you have old technology that you still need to depend on. So when you look at this, I mean, I don't want to make this about age, but just because something gets older, you don't toss it out. It doesn't
Right.
mean it's necessarily out of date. There's still some wisdom in it. So what do you think is a good mix? I mean, whether it's the new technology that, Ray, that your folks are working on, to the concerns about microwaves. All of a sudden, bonded cellular's out. Because all this other technology, to me, depends on third-party support outside of your control. So how do you handle that?
Well, I think the point was well taken that we use everything in our back pocket, right? Everything in the toolkit, I guess you can call it. I mean, we're heavily invested in TVU for our bonded signal at ABC. We do have a couple of other vendors we use, or a couple of manufacturers. Satellite trucks, again, in weather, especially weather, so we're still talking about that, or any kind of story. We are always looking at KU in our transmission plan. Other things we're using more bonded signal in the way of PepLink or PepWave, just to give us more bandwidth. Usually a comms play for that, just because of the limitations there is. But we've had some times where we've gone out with PepLink and actually gone basically 20 square, where we actually could move video over that, at least for return, I think. I'm not too sure if we'd actually transmit our signal back on it. And then lastly, what we're doing now is we're actually looking and investigating using data over KU. So we're looking at like a small throwdown flyway, maybe a 1.2 meter antenna, and moving small amounts of data over that for comms. I think we rely mostly on the KU truck in most cases for sending back like a network program like GMA, a piece for GMA or something for World News. But we certainly back it up with TVU most of the time. And if we're in some situations where TVU is our primary and we have a hardline internet connection, we'll use that, certainly use that. So I think the answer to the question really is we're using everything we possibly could. And we're looking at new technologies all the time to be able to, spin up comms in a better way. As everybody knows in this room, twisted pair is really not an option anymore for comms, right? You're not going to, especially in breaking news, you're not going to go out and get a phone line ordered and get it dropped in 6 hours, right? So, we're leveraging that PepLink, and we're leveraging other technologies to be able to, spin up comms in a breaking news story, and we're basically, dropping LQ on top of that, free speak to do, local comms in those situations as well. So, we're just, we're using everything we have, and I think that's a great point.
The death of the KU microwave truck is greatly exaggerated. But having said that, I'll tell one little story without naming names. But I know of a station on the West Coast. There was a system failure among one of the bonded cellulars. In about 6 hours, that station couldn't get anything in. And the news director had to put a memo out a couple of days later saying, it's come to my attention that no one's tried their KU or microwave in about 2 years. So there's a reason we have them, everybody do it. But I also don't want to knock bonded cell, particularly because I see Dominic from LiveView back there. We use it all the time. It really is fantastic, and it's been tremendously advantageous to us. But it's, while I understand, I'm not on the finance side. If I was, I'd probably love it even more. But my job is to make sure that everybody in this room sees that image when they want to see it. And that's why we use everything possible.
I'm still a fan of two-way radios. I think when we were
Yeah.
we were gearing up for the hurricane, I'm asking everyone to check the two-way radios on all the live trucks, and people are, the millennial was like, "You mean the CB?" I'm like, "Yeah, check the CB. Let's see if the CB works."
Did it?
It did.
I guess from an Avid perspective, having the benefit of listening to these guys who are experts up here who live it every single day, I think when we hear feedback like what you're hearing now from these guys and from our customers is, we kind of have as an industry 1 foot in the traditional over-the-air world, and we have 1 foot in the burgeoning digital OTT world, right? And you have this explosion of inputs, right? Bonded cellular, protocols, user-generated content, and then you have this explosion of ways in which people are consuming that content, right? On demand, whether it be delivering it live, OTT, or on-demand content that's short form or even long form, right? The prior presentation talked a lot about some long form content that they're developing for a deeper angle on a story. So what we're trying to do at Avid is trying to enable the aggregation of that content and make it easy to not only get those video feeds in, but also all the metadata that goes along with it, so that you can quickly turn that story around and deliver it to multiple platforms and different protocols and different bit rates, and basically make it so it's transparent to the end user. So enable mobile workflows, put mobile devices in the hands of all the journalists that are out in the field that are getting closer and closer to those stories. It's interesting to hear your perspective about how technology is, in a lot of ways, very enticing because it's letting you get closer to a story that maybe you never could before, but then you realize some of the risks that come
Sure.
along with that. So that's pretty that's an interesting perspective I honestly never truly thought about. So yeah, at Avid we really rely on customers like yourselves and our ACA, which is 30,000 strong, to sort of help us guide what the roadmap looks like when it comes to mobile workflows.
Jack, I was just wondering with, you have a fairly large coverage area too, and the same kind of challenges everybody's dealing with here. How do you kind of look at your toolbox?
Well, we do what everybody else does. We try to find every tool that's available to us and utilize it to its best advantage for us in day-to-day coverage. But with the geography that Connecticut has, there were areas that for years you had to send a sat truck, buildings, mountains, whatever it had to be. That's changed with the broadband. Has it allowed us to get closer to where the action is, where before we would park a truck and pull cable. And I agree with you guys that we just have to make sure that folks don't get lazy with, when's the last time the microwave truck was fired up? So we have a process in place that we test everything weekly to make sure it's up and running. But it's been a huge advantage to us in coverage.
Yeah, well,
just getting to spots that we couldn't before, or there were times where when I drove a SAT truck, you couldn't get to that site because a bridge. The SAT truck was 13.3. Now the Cruise and Explorer, they're there, so it's been huge.
Or in my case, almost getting arrested for parking the satellite truck in the wrong spot. But one of the things is with this new technology, with the possibilities that open up where you can be instantaneous from everywhere, do you feel, and I think you all do, that it's a good balance of that fear of losing against the benefits as long as you have some other support mechanism?
We do have the support mechanism, but I think one of the things that we haven't touched on yet was the finance side of things.
Yeah.
Is,
I'm
talking to a
saving the
finance
best for
director saying, we're paying X amount for something we use how many times a year, is the question that comes up. And what is that really buying me? So we have to get creative with our answers.
One thing about safety too, and it's kind of obvious and silly, but make sure you have veterans. What we try to do is a very healthy mix of taking in new people in their 20s who can bring in the new technology to us and show us, but try to pair them up with people so that they kind of meld. We had one young woman we picked up from New York One recently who called me up and said, I just did the greatest assignment. I said, what'd you do? So I walked up and down the George Washington Bridge. She actually walked up and down the piping or whatever you call it and didn't tell anybody. They offered it to her at the last minute, and my heart sank, and I looked through a room of guys who all looked at me like they were going to write me up for endangering her life. You need that healthy mix of people who've been around and know what they can and can't do, but also people who do know those new technologies and can bring them to you. But you send a veteran out into a fire or Sandy, there's always that comfort level knowing that if there is a very dangerous situation, they are going to call, they're going to let you know, and they're going to do everything they can to make sure that they don't become the story.
Okay, now we get into the fun part, because we're all dealing with having to manage people and material in a very tight economic situation. You know, none of us make money, we only spend money. Our product makes money, but we only spend money, so we have to spend it wisely. And there's an old rule I heard a long time ago that you guys, I know probably everybody in the room knows, the good, fast, cheap rule. You can get any one of the two, you can't get the third, no matter how hard you try. So we're dealing in a good, fast, cheap world now with this technology and reliability and costs. And they vary between a WCBS, where I'm going to guess you're going to have to do everything you can, you don't care if the story is big enough, you're going to do it, to people who are dealing in small markets where news is on very tight margins and the stations are on very tight margins. And when you do buy a technology, the hidden costs, the expense lines with the support, in the case of a lot of this IP stuff, the infrastructure, the things you need to do to make it reliable, where do you begin to try to make a good judgment every year as you sit down to do your budget line about what are you going to capitalize, what are you going to expense?
I think the biggest issue now is you look at the old traditional ROI, 5 years for something to fall off the chart. The technology eclipses so fast now. So like think of like when we went to beta camera, you were using those cameras and decks for 10 years. Well, now if you make a major capital purchase in 3 years, it's obsolete or it's worn out. So I think and of course the equipment is cheaper and lighter, but I think there has to be a faster rotation of some of the gear that's coming in and out in order to kind of stay up on things. And I found that that's where that can run out on you really quick. You make an investment, it's supposed to last for 5, it really made it to 3, either whether it didn't hold up or the technology changed radically on you. So I think that's the critical point.
I think a great example of that is actually drones. You know, drones, you can buy one at a 7-Eleven practically. There was some pressure on us, but we are WCBS, so it wasn't that much in terms of getting rid of the helicopter. And we had to explain to them, no, drones are like, actually, we use them as jib shots, really. But the helicopter, yeah, it costs $1 million a year, but they're just, even though they're both up in the air, they do different things. But we are very fortunate, and I understand when I talk to our vendors, why there is pressure among markets not in the #1 market to really watch those bottom lines. But we spend a lot of money on R&D basically, and we're fortunate in that regard. Mm-hmm.
It's the same with ABC. I mean, we do a lot of R&D, try to stay ahead of the technology or at least keep up with it. Most of our planning really from finances for CapEx is really to kind of create a big bucket in some cases, probably to the chagrin of most of the finance people. But we do a lot of purchasing based on our planning, a lot of research we do. We try to stay ahead of it. We're looking at small form factor cameras all the time. We're heavily invested in that for our digital journalists, especially with a political cycle coming up. So, in most cases, again, like you said, it's a lot of research and development, a lot of testing, a lot of meetings with our close vendors and everybody just to make sure we're all on the same page. And they bring to us a lot of options. We weigh those options very carefully. But when we get down to the nitty-gritty and we're really looking at what we're going to purchase versus operating versus CapEx, really what it comes down to the CapEx are the projects, right? The bigger projects where you're trying to actually develop a new technology from A to Z. And that's mostly where your CapEx comes in. And then the operating part really comes up when we need, our needs, our day-to-day needs.
Right.
And, it's a never-ending battle, really. I mean, all our budgets are shrinking every day. So we're always putting ourselves in a position where we have to make decisions based on really, again, our strategy going forward. And that's what's really all about, is strategy. So we do the best we can. And, we're coming up now on our 19 fiscal, and we're looking at probably by the end of the year, or maybe soon after the end of the year, looking at what we're going to get. And there's, again, challenges from the company to give back and find ways to save. And in our world, it's very difficult. And I think we're serving a lot of different, people in the news division where I work. There's digital, there's the news gathering desk, there's the technical engineering part that I manage. So there's so many moving parts here that actually come out of my budget or our budget here in engineering that that it's so big and so immense. The ask from a financial standpoint is we usually get pretty close to what we're looking for. And again, it's a challenge, but mostly if we stay ahead of the technology, ask the right questions, work with our vendors, we really get a lot of goodness out of that.
I should say, though, that more often than not, almost all the time, the new technology does offer the promise of cheaper. I mean, so for example, about 5-6 years back, we got the next gen of Sony professional ENG cameras and dropped 50, 60, 70K per unit. But yesterday, I purchased a couple on B&H for $2,500, and those will also be used to shoot packages. So when you can sell it as we're going to give this a shot, but this could result in this kind of savings, it becomes much easier to do so.
I was going to ask in particular, Ray, about what you see in the market trends. Are we finally ready to make that transition from, I'm going to call it big iron for lack of a term, for what we do, the $40,000 field cameras, the $300,000-$400,000 ENG vehicles, and look at ways of using, smaller, cheaper cameras in the field, interconnectivity, maybe among stations in a region that are group owned with storage salvos, places where all of the shared news resources could reside and then be distributed in another way to try to help on keeping the cost down so that where the money can be spent is where it needs to be, which is in covering the news?
Yeah, I mean, we're working with our customers, and each case, I would say, is unique, and so it comes down to workflow. So it's understanding what the goals are for the organization, and then designing a multi-year phased approach towards achieving those goals. And some of that could include a move to IP. It could include a moving some of the segments of the workflow to the cloud, whether that be for OTT distribution or for sharing, collaboration amongst regional stations in a station group. And then it's catering a license agreement across multiple years to sort of protect against some of the obsolescence you guys are referring to, right, over multiple years, to keep you fresh and current from a technology perspective, while at the same time allowing you to sort of lower cost and stay up to date with all of these different things that are happening in our industry. I do think that some of the workflows that are sort of being bandied about would be remote editing. Especially in news where it's somewhat lower bit rate, it actually becomes very easy for us to support remote editing capabilities for people in the field. So that gives you a lot more flexibility from a news perspective. And then from a sharing perspective, having a centralized repository where everybody can basically post content and share that one story. I know, again, on the panel before this, someone mentioned 41, George Bush Sr. dying. And that's a national story, so why have your regional folks focus on a national story? So let's post, common story everybody can take advantage of, and then localize, and then let them focus on how that affects them on the regional side of things. And so it's providing that infrastructure to enable that to happen in a very simple way. And then last but not least, we're seeing people starting to look at ways in which they could archive some of their content, which would be taking content off of LTO libraries where it makes sense, and then leverage sort of the elasticity of the cloud and the ability to auto-index that content, which then makes it a lot more valuable and accessible. So we're starting to, I think, see some of that. But like I said, we're still in a world where there's one foot firmly planted in the need to deliver content over the air while we're all migrating to some of these newer OpEx type operational models.
Do you see any more reliability in having a hybrid cloud, a private cloud structure versus individual stores on site? Because, again, my experience would be always worrying about my data provider going down.
Yeah. No, I mean, for sure. I mean, that's the benefit of, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. They have built these cloud infrastructures to the nth degree. So not just what does it cost to store something on an LTO tape, but what are the costs around cooling that tape, building up the disaster recovery environments, and all the people that are associated with managing, keeping all of those components up to date on a regular basis. All of that factors into that cost model, including electricity, cooling, and everything else, right? And so You have to measure that against, you know, what it costs to put stuff into the cloud, which continues to come down, and then what that means operationally for the actual physical bodies in the building and what they're actually focused on, right? And how much can you sort of save in that area and focus on what you want to do best, which is create compelling content, right? And that's really what we're trying to do. And the other thing we're seeing is people trying to move towards a common platform so that there aren't siloed you know, infrastructures in these different affiliate stations where it gets difficult to talk to each other. So we're seeing a move across the industry to try and sort of consolidate and move to a common platform so that everybody's, you know, using the same tool set and leveraging tool sets on mobile devices to sort of access content. Again, making it sort of transparent, so regardless of whether that content sits inside of a repository at a local affiliate or that content is sitting somewhere in the cloud, to the journalist out in the field, it's really transparent. They're just searching for a piece of content, they find it, they grab it, they use it, they put it in their rundown, and they post it, right? And so that's kind of what we're trying to get to.
Along the similar topics, just for everybody here, would be the push toward the smaller $2,500 cameras to put in the field in replacement of what we're sort of using. And there's always this debate, especially among the more professional photographers, that I can't do it with, you know, the smaller camera. I can't.
I got to jump in. They're not going to replace them. For one thing, you drop them and they're disposable. We have found that out the hard way. Not with the 2500, but Sony's a good example. You know, you could fix the professional NG Sony cameras. We have had people drop the $8,000 version prosumer camera, and they say it's $7,000 to fix, and you'll get it back in 6 weeks. So I understand there are markets out there that see the advantage, and you know, they'll just keep a bunch on the shelf, and you could do that, sure, if you want. But those cameras will not last the 10 years of snowstorms and fires and everything else that you expect them to. It's a little bit like what we were talking about in terms of how to get the signal back in.
Right.
It's everything. You want to have them all on the shelf. You want it because each thing has a different application. One doesn't necessarily replace another. You know, digital replaced analog, got it. HD replaced SD, got it. But in terms of the equipment aspect of it, it's much more difficult to throw something else out.
About
I know that we provide our photographers when they're going out on a higher profile, such as the Pope in Philly a couple years ago. They brought their A-game camera, and we also provided them with a small disposable. It worked great. It was a spot where he was traveling from one location to another and was able to get some content that he wouldn't be able to because his camera was locked down. But he had that little small disposable with him, and it was just fantastic. You know, Amazon buy. So.
Right.
Okay, our last topic, because we'll be running short on time here and we want to leave time for questions, is talking about communications in the field and how they've changed. Because, you know, we touched a little bit on, I never want to give up my two-way radio, but we all know that two-way radios can be overheard, among other things. So what are you all starting to try to standardize on for communications with your folks in the field?
Well, I can just reiterate what I said before about the fact that we're moving away, obviously, because of the lack of the availability of POTS or, you know, twisted pair, copper, and going over the internet. So again, we're leveraging LQ, FreeSpeak for on-site, you know, just kind of party line communications. That technology for us is perfect. We're right in the pocket on that one. Feels really good as long as we have the bandwidth. Again, it's always the big question is whether we have the bandwidth. And to back up those systems is really, again, what I was talking about before was whether we were throwing down a small flyaway to spin up some data or whether we're using PepLink or PepWave to aggregate data across the board. We're going full in really on those type of technologies. And also on our KU trucks, we also use NewTek, so we can, you know, create a minimal amount of dial tone if we need to off the satellite. So I mean, that's really where we're going with that. And again, we do carry radios. Of course, we have radios in all our KU trucks, and we pack them up when we're going on larger jobs. But for the most part, we're really just relying on the new technology to, you know, to satisfy our comms needs. And it's working really well. It's working really great, and it sounds great. You know, remember the old days? You'd be like 3.5 kilohertz over a phone line, and your talent's saying like, "This sounds like crap." You know, I can't even hear what's going on in the control room. Well, now with this new technology, especially with the LQ stuff through ClearComm, this stuff sounds like you're literally sitting in the control room. So I think we've had really good luck with it, and we're going to press forward in that, at least from the network level.
I'll give a plug. Something we discovered, I don't know if you heard of the Unity Intercom app. It's really affordable. It ties in directly to a couple different of the intercom systems like RTS and Clearcom, and it's, this is like our IFP right here, but it allows the user to select the IFP, but also ties in directly to the assignment desk, to what we call our video control, and the producer through this app, and this has made a huge difference. It was it's one of those things where it was slow to be adopted because people want to dial on their cell phones, and then we had election night, and then we found that you need one big event, then everybody embraces it, and so now it's really been adopted. So I think there's a lot of IP kind of intercom and communication apps that have really changed and helped.
But that doesn't say that the old technology is not good either. I mean, I'll give you a great story real quick. Take 2 seconds. We went and covered the fires up in Malibu Hills, and I ran out there for one long day of working with David Muir, and we got up into the hills. Verizon had already fallen over. AT&T was just barely hanging on. The new tech in my truck, for some reason, wasn't working very well. So what did we do? We pulled out 2 big ANT terminals. And we don't use them much anymore. I mean, we're still paying a lot of money every year to have that opportunity to use it and have it in our back pocket, but that's one of those older technologies that you have to use when you need it. We stood up that show, right? A network news show on BGAN, which we normally would never think we would have to do, but when you're put in that situation.
What was the last time you used it before that?
I mean, we have them worldwide. We have a small plan that we share. We have about 250 BGANs across the worldwide. But when I look at the billing over a year's period of time, we're not using it very much at all.
Wow.
Yeah. But we have them in case we need them.
Jack, you have any comments on that?
Oh, no, I just agree with the Unity. We produce an off-site lifestyle show every day, and it was a godsend for us. It's fantastic. It's worked above and beyond our wild stream, so it's great. We're looking forward to integrating it more into day-to-day ops.
Well, that's great. I'm hoping everybody realizes that what everybody here feels is that the new promise of the technology that's out there, that's coming, that's making our lives a lot easier, allows us to do one thing that we all want to do, is cover more news. There is no such thing as a day when we've had enough news. We're all filled. If there's more news, we want to be able to get it on the air. We're able to do more with it. But at the same time, there is an importance to looking at the technology still in your control that you still hold on to, and using them too, and making sure that they don't wind up being discarded. And I would like to thank the panel for that. And Jill's here with a microphone, and she's going to
I have a question.
And we got a question.
For Dave and Peter, your groups are plunging ahead with OTT. What kind of new demands is that making on you? Dave, you want to start?
For OTT, actually, speaking of small cameras, I actually shot one of the pilots that we did for OTT, and the challenge that I kind of gave myself was we shot it only with GoPros, stabilized DJI camera, and phones. And because I wanted to kind of prove the concept that OTT could be shot without using $45,000, $100,000 gear camera. So we started that. We did a pilot called On the Job, which is kind of a dirty jobs show. And our channel's fully fledged and up and running, and I think we've just now kicked in with the on-demand. But I will say we've firewalled slightly. Some of the content is actually coming from our creative services team now that we're launched, and not from news, because we really wanted to make sure that news could just continue to do news. And so some of our shows, if you look at our program and our pages, is kind of non-traditional news. We have a series about craft brewery, On the Job series, and we do a Science of Florida. It's fun stuff. It's very different than the day-to-day news, but it's actually we're sharing some of the people that are in our station to make that go. It's worked out so far.
We're actually very well positioned. We've been in the prosumer world and social media and what have you for quite some time now, and our equipment is so well distributed out there that it's really going to be more of a mindset in terms of the deadlines and what have you with the new shows and the 24/7 aspect of it. But we've been in practice for a while now, and we're launching this month. And so far, it's been going very well. I mean, there are little things. I was telling one of my colleagues earlier. We have to add another mic flag to the toolkit because it's now something called CBS NNY, and so we have to figure out. We have WCBS, we have WLNY. You know, so we're going to wind up with a 5-sided mic flag or something. You know, just, I mean, it's just little things like that. But in terms of fundamentally, because we've been so engaged in getting the material back in and getting it out there, just on the internet, you know, whatever, however you want to describe that, this is going pretty well. Yeah. Right.
Thanks. I'd like to ask the panel their expectations around 5G and what that's going to deliver, and will there still be a place for bonded cellular vendors?
Yeah, my quick answer on 5G was we were excited about it when it was coming out. I think we're doing very well with 4G LTE, and I have concerns about 5G being able to cover all of the swamps and hidden areas of Florida where bad stories happen and where we usually go and need to have it. So my concern with 5G is I love the bandwidth. I don't know if we're going to have the penetration across everywhere where I need it. And the way things are going now with the compression schemes of bonded cellular, it's really impressive what you can do with 2 megs of data now. So love to have it, but I'm not optimistic it's going to be there everywhere.
I've been working very closely with my good friends at Verizon on 5G, and we're going to be doing some beta testing with them. But I am extremely concerned about how much limited the reach is going to be versus 4G. I mean, I've been told half a block in some circumstances. So, you know, you could be standing here, you have 25 gigs, and you could be another foot and you got nothing. So I hope they don't toss 4G out when they come up with it. But having said that, I mean, it's nothing but exciting. We're even talking about putting nodes on some of our trucks. You know, so bring it on. But like everything else, bring it on and keep that old stuff ready.
I think we have time for one more question. Anybody else? Oh, there's a question.
Jack, NBC is building a big new green, I guess we could call it a green field in Connecticut. Do you have aspirations for doing something new and different with field production?
I think that's up to folks higher in the food chain than myself to make that decision. But we, you know, producing some great field programming right now. We just stood up a show, a lifestyle show, and we're very proud of it. But the rest of the field production, I'm kind of interested to see what path we go down.
Okay, thanks. I thought maybe you had some desires that you might share in terms of how that might change field production. No, it's more in the studio, you think?
We do a lot of, in the studio, we produce a lot of news content locally, and then a lot of interesting field things, you know, for our day-to-day lifestyle production.
Thank you.
Well, these are a bunch of busy people, trust me, and I really appreciate them taking the time to come up here and have a conversation with you all. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something interesting from it. And thank you again for coming and attending.
Thanks.